when I was first doing research and like looking into RFK Jr., I was actually surprised by just the amount of dishonesty from this man. Hey guys, Classy Neurotic here, and today I'm going to be reacting to when Dr. Mike was on Jubilee regarding the whole vaccine topic. I think it's going to be really interesting.
My next claim is that vaccine-acquired immunity is better than natural immunity.
I mean, yeah, he's not wrong. I'd rather not get the disease, so yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Knight.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. I want to say first that I'm a mother of 6 children. My oldest 2 children do have vaccines. My third child, he got a vaccine that the doctor said were safe that caused him brain issues for the rest of his life, and he has arrested hydrocephalus.
So with some of these personal stories, you have to be very careful. I'm not gonna, of course, doubt the validity of the story. I'm sure it actually happened to her, and some of these things can be like really bad. And I would never want to take away someone's personal experience or any sort of like actual like anecdotes here because like this, of course, would just validate that.
I want to continue to say my youngest 3 children have no vaccines at all. They're perfectly fine. They're advanced. My son has permanent brain injury, so they say vaccine immunity is better, but as a child, when I got vaccines, I ended up with spinal meningitis. I had chicken pox twice. I almost died, but my 3 children
It's
that don't have any
insane.
vaccines are perfectly fine. They've been traveled over 20 states during COVID. They've never got COVID.
Okay.
They've never got sick. Just a healthy diet, keeping them away from toxic foods, making sure their hygiene is good. Did you know that COVID has a patent and natural illnesses can't have patents? Did you know that
Uh, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about like the diagnosis or treatment of disease, you can't you can't patent an actual disease. I mean, come on.
every illness dated back to polio has a patent? The only thing that doesn't have a patent is the common cold. Did you know that Fauci
These
funded
fat
medical
checks are
schools
really
to
good.
try to make the vaccine more?
Okay, that's not true. She's kind of talking about the whole gain of function thing. So what they did with at least Fauci in particular is that they gave NIH funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but it was specifically for a study to actually genotype coronaviruses in the wild. So you guys may not know this, but bats have just just multitudes more variants of coronaviruses compared to humans. So they gave this funding so this Wuhan Institute can basically kind of like measure like all these like genes that are like associated with coronaviruses, but that's not the same thing of gain of function research.
Or not the vaccine make COVID more deadly? Vaccine immunity is not really a thing because they cannot guarantee it makes anybody immune. There's more side effects from getting a vaccine than to not get a vaccine.
I'm wearing like an hour fourth. That's a good fact check. Like goodness.
The chances of getting illness not vaccinated versus to getting vaccines is a lot higher than somebody that doesn't eat toxic crap, practices good hygiene. They're more likely to get illness vaccinated versus not vaccinated. There's studies that show unvaccinated children are more healthy.
So these results were observed before vaccine and are irrespective of vaccine. So that's a pretty interesting. I imagine that people who have like a healthy diet and like good exercise are far less likely to have like worse symptoms for COVID-19. And one of the concerns is because in the United States, like so many people have comorbidities, be it high blood pressure, be it heart disease, or maybe they have like something wrong with their lungs, or some all sorts of like immunocompromise and that sort of thing. That there's a concern that like COVID-19 was going to be worse for these people in comparison to the general population. But here in the United States, we have like lots of huge problems with like obesity, overweightness, and stuff like that. So that was a really big concern. It's still kind of still is, but at least we have like treatments for COVID-19 and a vaccine, which works really well.
Healthier. In Japan, they don't start their vaccine schedule, I believe, until 2 years old. Autism's almost
Goodness, I think this is like the sixth one. So Japan's really interesting because I know for a fact Japan vaccine skepticism is actually really big, even bigger than it is here in the United States. So it doesn't surprise me that they have a different vaccine schedule. But that actually changed with like COVID-19. Actually, they were among the countries with the highest amount of vaccination rates for COVID-19. Very interesting. It says right here that the Japan Pediatric Society recommends vaccination at 2 months, not 2 years. So slightly different, but and then it's what's really interesting here in this fact check. It says three recent studies in Japan show more than 3% of Japanese children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder compared with 2.8% estimated in the United States. So it's actually just slightly more Japanese children are being diagnosed with autism in comparison with the United States, despite the fact that they have different vaccine schedules.
Almost non-existent. And this is something that needs to be documented. Dated back to polio, everything has a patent except for the common cold. Mad cow disease, Spanish flu, COVID, everything
She just doesn't stop. And bro, wasn't that like 6 or 7 fact checks? Wow.
has a patent. So that leads me to believe Big Pharma has been ruining our people for generations since the Great Depression, since, like he said, Rockefeller agreed to fund medical schools and the education system around 1920s.
I know Rockefeller does have like a huge role in like medical school education. For there's actually they have their own university actually in New York City, Rockefeller University. They don't do biomedical research. It's not like a place where you like do your undergrad. I think it's just like you do like a PhD there, or like postdoc. But to the extent of like how much medical school education is based on Rockefeller, I don't know. I would have to look into it, but it's interesting. There might be something worth looking at.
Since then, illnesses have increased and increased and increased and increased and increased, and all we ever needed was to take care of ourselves and have good hygiene.
Something I think our healthcare system doesn't do enough is say, I don't know. And I have no idea about Dr. Fauci's patents. I don't know about patents on viruses. I'm a family medicine physician. That means I work in a clinic where people come in with either an acute complaint, something's going on with them, or they're coming in for a preventive physical where we can get ahead of things and make them healthier by preventing illness.
Yeah.
In fact, if you think about where pharma's profits are, if pharma had to choose between preventing an illness or to treat an illness for the rest of someone's life, financially speaking, they'd probably want to just treat someone for the rest of their life.
Exactly.
But that's not what vaccines are. Vaccines prevent that
exactly.
illness. They prevent it from happening.
Or at the very least, if you get the disease, it's not going to be that bad. So if you get a vaccine, basically you get a weakened version of the virus, and then your body fights it a lot easily, compared to like if you would actually have the actual disease. And basically, yeah, like you would get the disease. Let's say you have the vaccine, you get the disease. It won't be that bad if you actually had it. And then potentially the pharmaceutical companies would lose out on like treating the disease if you have like adverse side effects as symptoms from the actual disease. And it's just really interesting because the whole like vaccine model, if it's a profit model, keep in mind that like one, these vaccines are typically given for free. I mean, yes, they're highly subsidized by the government. There's just so much that has to go into maintaining these vaccines. They have to be kept under cold temperature. The preservatives we have to like use to like maintain the vaccines, like you lose a lot of money into this. It's extremely expensive. But the long-term gains is that people are gonna have a much better chance of fighting the disease with relatively low risk of death or adverse symptoms in compared to just like having the disease.
And when you brought up the subject of autism, I think it's an important subject, and it's a subject that's been largely debunked by the
Not at
entire
all.
world community.
It did. So this thing comes from like Andrew Wakefield, who was this British doctor, and a long time ago he published a study supposedly associating vaccine. I believe it was the MMR vaccine with autism. It was a specific vaccine. I want to say it's MMR, but I could be wrong. Uh, the study only had like a dozen participants, and it was actually redacted by I believe it was like the Royal College of Physicians, and they found that like essentially had so many issues it really wasn't a legitimate manuscript that like people could use. And the problem with a lot of these anti-vaccine people is that they tend to be extremely dishonest with their either their own studies that they conduct with like Andrew Wakefield or the studies that they're source. But the interesting thing about the whole link between vaccines and autism, um, there are a lot of ways you can study this. One way is that if you look at countries with different vaccine schedules, you often find that they have the very similar rates of autism. And we've done like so many papers, just like studying links between vaccine and autism, and we just haven't found anything. But I believe the Wakefield paper was like one of the at the time it was like one of the biggest paper that's ever been redacted. Oh, it mentions right here the fact check actually saying that the study was reviewed and redacted years later by the publisher, The Lancet, after finding several elements of the paper were incorrect. And interesting enough, I think Wakefield was incentivized to publish the study because his like, name was actually on a uh competitive immunotherapy that would have been used uh in lieu of like the vaccine that was used at that time.
Unity.
Not at all. I've seen studies that say otherwise, doctor. So
The study author Rick Wakefield was banned from practicing medicine in Britain after being found guilty of professional misconduct. Yeah, he lost his license and he lost his medical degree too. I don't even think he could call himself doctor anymore.
I don't know if you're going off Rockefeller's medicine or you going off of holistic medicine as well. As a scientific mind, you're supposed to observe everybody's hypothesis, not just Rockefeller's medicine.
I mean, yeah, you're supposed to review, credible hypothesis, but if you can perform these studies and you don't get results that like go like one way or the other, why are you continuing to say all this stuff like oh vaccines cause autism? It's been shown time and time again that it doesn't. Like this is how science works. You form a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you have data, you draw conclusions based on that data, and then you discuss this with the world. We could do more studies on autism and vaccine link, but it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
Medical schools, and that's why I feel like you've got most of your knowledge from, and maybe you should branch out into holistic medicine because vaccines have never been the answer. They were created.
That's actually kind of interesting because Dr. Mike is actually a DO, so he doesn't have an MD. Instead, he has a DO, which is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. So he would know a little bit about holistic medicine because that is essentially what differentiates osteopathic physicians from allopathic physicians, which is like majority of what they study is basically the same. It's just medicine, but then like they also like look into like cultural aspects of populations. Like they might look into healthcare disparities. They might look at like other like complementary treatments that like you could use, like osteopathic manipulation. So I don't know, it's like something to consider.
To separate us from spirituality and consciousness. If you look at the ingredients, there's
Oh, okay, this girl is insane, and even the other person's like raising their flag. What do we got here? Religion has been linked to vaccine skepticism in multiple studies. While the topic is highly complex, one study attempted to break down it to 5 religious motivations. Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. She's gonna get into like some, I don't know, woo or like new age stuff. Like I can't really like argue against like what am I even supposed to say with this?
nothing healthy in vaccines, formaldehyde, all types of stuff. So none of that prevents.
Do they still use formaldehyde in vaccines? Um, it's a preservative, but like you have to like look into things that like it's the dose that makes the poison. There's a lot of like weird ingredients with vaccines. Like for example, they use like chicken embryo, and that's in order to like that's a way to like preserve sort of either like the attenuated virus or the mRNA if it's like an mRNA vaccine. And we're looking to possibly using like alternatives because like some people are allergic to eggs and they can't have that. I know mercury used to be used, but I don't think we use mercury anymore. And when we did, it was a very small amount. But again, like you have to remember that those makes the poison for a lot of these substances.
Everybody that vaccines still get illnesses. I've never seen any prevention of anything.
The prevention from vaccines comes from prevention of death and serious illness. And we've seen that when you study that, not just in the US by the Rockefeller system that you described, one of the largest studies in the world surrounding vaccines and autism in children came from Denmark with over 500,000 children.
Really
that is not a
interesting.
US system, that is not a capitalist system, and they found that there is no pattern.
Well, Denmark is a capitalist country, but I think what he meant to say is that Denmark has a socialized healthcare system in sort of America's privatized healthcare system. And yeah, when talking about like these studies or talking about studies in other countries, it's actually a good idea to looking like what they do in like places like UK or Scandinavian countries, because they have a different healthcare system that's not a privatized system. It's a socialized medicine. So there's less, of a profit incentive in these countries.
That's not
So
true.
I'm trying to branch out as much as possible.
Pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
Okay.
Please
Thank you
return
so
to your
much.
seat.
Oh,
Hello, how are you?
So I want to take a minute and put the ball back on your court because you mentioned herd immunity earlier, correct? Well, was COVID one of the most contagious viruses we've had, pretty much?
I don't know, historically speaking, but it was definitely incredibly contagious.
yeah.
In fact,
I would
because
say
it wasn't
was
so
really
deadly,
contagious.
was the reason why it was such a problem.
You want herd immunity. How would we achieve herd immunity if a virus is so contagious that wouldn't it spread across the population before we get it all vaccinated? Like,
Not every vaccine can create herd immunity, but it can create herd protection.
Yeah.
There's two different types of viruses that exist, and there's long incubation diseases and there's short incubation diseases. The simplest way I could explain it is how quickly you get sick after you're exposed to this infection. That's short incubation.
Yeah.
So if it's fast, it's short incubation. If it's long incubation. Now, when you look at a disease like smallpox, for example, that's a long incubation illness. It means it gives your immune system a chance to create a response to it. So if you've been vaccinated, even if you've been vaccinated a long time ago, your body has the time to create protection even after it's been exposed. For short incubation illnesses like the common cold,
And some of these like antibodies can like stay for like a really long time. I think like with COVID-19, one of the issues is like why they recommend the booster shot is because like the antibodies you get from either the infection of COVID-19 or the vaccine would wane off at a certain point. I want to say it's 3 months. It might be a bit off actually.
influenza, COVID-19, it's very difficult to create complete protection. Because even though you've gotten some protection from getting the vaccine in a short period of time, that immunity wanes, and the long-term protection you get is only valuable against serious illness like death, hospitalization, etc. Okay. So you can't get perfect herd immunity for short incubation diseases.
okay, thank you. So I guess my follow-up question is that there were certain groups of people who were exempt from getting the COVID vaccine, like if you were under a certain age or over a certain age, or if you had immunocompromised problems or whatever. So if those people can't get the vaccine, and those are the people who are most vulnerable, and a lot of people in this room believe, well, a lot of people's natural immunity is good enough to fight the disease, then like why would we get the vaccine when the people that, if they can't get it, then
Well, the thing is, again, you're risking possibly getting adverse effects for the vaccine. So the thing is, we have to go with the comorbidities thing. A lot of Americans have issues with blood pressure or obesity, all sorts of things. And it could be really bad for them. Like, we're not a very healthy country right now. And we've seen plenty of cases of people who are perfectly healthy either have a really hard time with COVID, fighting off the disease, and in some cases even death. With death, that one's a little bit more rare, but You know, it's not fun. Being stuck in an incubator. It it's rare, but it's a non-zero chance.
They could die anyways, you know?
Yeah, so the point of that is by getting the vaccine as a healthy person, I believe that's better than having natural
Yeah.
immunity. And that doesn't mean that by getting the vaccine, you have a better response or a stronger response. In fact, many times, actually getting the disease will give you a better response. But you
So I remember, I think there were some papers at the time. I might have to refresh my memory. I think there were some papers saying that if you had COVID-19 and like you survived it, whatever, you ended up with an equal or even better immune response, as it like you would either have the same amount of antibodies or even like more antibodies that would stay like in your system for like for a certain amount of time. I don't know if it was the same amount of time where you had like more antibodies. Um, but like you said, like you're risking the chance of getting COVID-19. And now we're learning a lot more with COVID-19 that even people who had like moderate cases are now experiencing long-term effects. Like there's a lot of studies in long COVID. It's really interesting. We were like finding this out as time went on, but yeah, now there's like more papers saying that yeah, there could be some like long-term neurological effects with COVID-19 actually. So, see what he says.
know what you have to do in order to get that response?
Like, get the virus in you.
Yeah.
Correct, which means you have to have all the potential risks of having severe disease, death, and largely we've forgotten how serious these viruses and bacteria are, where in the 20s, in the 50s, in the 80s, the deadliness of those diseases has been largely forgotten. One of the vaccines we give to children is called Haemophilus influenza. That causes meningitis. We don't see that anymore. The residents that were trained 20 years before me, every time they were in the emergency room, they learned how to do a spinal tap to diagnose this type of meningitis because of that bacteria. I've never learned how to do it.
It's really interesting.
I'm not trained how to do it.
Wow.
Now we have to rely on interventional radiologists to do the procedure because of vaccines. So the reason why I say that vaccine immunity is better than natural immunity is because you don't have to survive the actual illness.
Okay. Well, that was my question.
Thank
they
you.
They could get another guy.
Appreciate
Wait. Hold on, chat. I mean, no one's watching me, but whatever. Did we just have a good faith discussion? I mean, he asked questions, and then Dr. Mike responded, and then he asked more questions, and it was just like a cordial back and forth. Like, I have a question about this, I have a question about that. Here's my response. Here's my response. And there's no fighting. There's no conspiracy theories. There's no gish galloping. I thought that was a pretty good conversation. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think the guy just like had genuine questions, and yeah, I don't know. I feel like we don't see this enough in Jubilee videos.
that. Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Mike, Eliezer.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as
I
well.
was actually binge watching your videos this week, thinking it was going to be you. I didn't think it was going to be you. You are very good faith, which I respect. Can I ask you a question in terms, because as a vaccine skeptic, the burden of proof is on you to show that vaccines do work. So what evidence would you have that vaccines actually work?
So vaccines, unlike other
The
drugs,
fact that polio has been eradicated. The fact that measles at one point was eradicated in the early 2000s and only recently has came back due to the fact that there's been a rise of vaccine skepticism. And also even with like COVID-19, I believe the first two doses were at the very least 90% effective against COVID-19. And I think Moderna one was actually like higher than like 96%. It's been a while, but I would have to like read this over. But if I find the paper, I'll post it in the description. But they were very effective with COVID-19.
drugs, and there have been claims made about this in the wrong
First two
direction,
dose.
where people say that vaccines aren't as tested as, let's say, pharmaceuticals. Because vaccines are given to healthy people to prevent disease, we test them an incredibly higher amount than pharmaceuticals. So that means pre-market testing before we bring them out. That means while we give them and after. We actually have a system called the Vaccine Safety Data Net that monitors millions of doses of the vaccines to see if a pattern gets elucidated through giving the vaccine. So we have all stages of the vaccine process monitored because we are trying to do our best to make sure that we help children and adults when they are due for a vaccine.
Okay, so you just, at the end, you said it pretty much sounds like you have to have a good intention. For example, we're not in the labs actually seeing the vaccine process or the clinical trials, so we have to just take the expert's word and trust it, right?
Well, when you fly in a plane, you're not in the cockpit.
So that's a really good point. I mean, you're not in the labs, but also you have a chance to like read the papers that are conducted in these clinical trials, and these are often done by independent agencies, either by the government or just like academics. And many people, of course, talk about this. You have other experts weighing in on the research. You have uh oftentimes there's like some sort of like media coverage like over it. It's as transparent as like you would expect it to be. I mean, is it possible that like, I don't know, someone out there is faking a Western blot or something? If it is, I mean, academics are really good at pointing that shit out. I mean, they're really good at telling like what is a fabricated result and what's not a fabricated. Especially now that like you could just like read these papers like online. Like years ago, you would have to like go to a library or have like some like super expensive like subscription service to like read any of these like manuscripts.
Right. So we put our faith in that. So you would say that we just have to put our faith in the experts, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this would require, number one, a good intention. So they have a good intention to help people, to make their lives better, and also they have to be ethical. Is that correct?
Those are reasonable things, yeah.
Okay, so if they fall outside of the purview of those two criteria, would you say it is reasonable for us to be skeptical?
I think it's reasonable to be skeptical at any moment.
But taking those two things, if they violate either of those two, would it give someone else more justification to be against it?
Sure.
Okay, so when we look at the biggest developers and distributors and sellers of the vaccines, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, all these big pharmaceutical companies, when we look at their track record, we see they have been deceptive. They've had big settlements, billions and billions of dollars, fraud, misleading the public, concealing clinical trials that were against their favor from the public.
So this is actually a really fair point. I know Johnson & Johnson, they've been in a lot of controversies. Even like some with like the COVID-19 vaccine. I know they actually took off like their vaccine off the market at some point though. There weren't that many cases with the blog. I can't remember the number from the top of my head though. But like when they take off like these like vaccines or these like medications on the market, usually like the threshold is like really really low. Like just if there's just like a few cases of these like adverse side effects from the vaccines, like there's reason to take them off. With some vaccines, they were like taken off either later on because like the benefit like outweighed the risk. But I think he's like referring to like just in general, a lot of these companies have like really shady history when it comes to like just like their drugs in general, like whether or not like they've been tested or not. And I think it's a huge problem for sure. And I think it's understandable that you want to look at the track record for these companies. But you also have to consider the fact that like we've gotten a lot better with our regulatory capabilities over the years. And you also have to like understand that with COVID-19, the mRNA vaccine, I mean, that technology was essentially developed as a collaboration between the government, between various academic agencies, and the private sector. So Operation Warp Speed. It's one of the good things Trump did during his presidency, which is like just give these companies a bunch of money. They didn't have to care about whether or not there was a financial risk, they could just go and warp speed, do all these studies and whatnot, and yeah, like thankfully they develop a vaccine like far ahead of schedule. But you can't discount the thousands of scientists and engineers and data analysts that are involved in these projects in both academia and in the private sector. So I think you have to look into the fact that like we're not just putting our trust in these like you know evil sort of pharmaceutical companies, which by the way they do suck. Like trust me, like I have my criticisms of Johnson and Johnson and all these companies, but you also have to understand that there are people who spent years, people who like, spent like 6 to 7 years doing a PhD where they made less than, someone in like retail because they really like have a love for science. You have people working in academia who make less than a bus driver doing a postdoc because like they really love the science though. I mean, considering like how low like people get paid in academia, I think you have to understand that there's a huge incentive for them. You have multiple agencies working with each other, and then you on top of that have like independent review boards. You have the institutional review board. You have all sorts of like ethic committees when it comes to these things.
So when we have to put our whole faith and trust in these people that have been through huge billions of dollars of settlements, and they have proven that they have been unethical, they have made more profit through the COVID times than ever before as well. Why should we trust them so lightly, taking into consideration?
But we're not trusting them lightly. I mean, he's already said over the fact that like we have the research that like we can like review over. I mean, they publish these studies like all the time. You, well, I'm just repeating myself. My bad.
Consideration the fact that we're not in the labs with them, taking the fact that they are profiting from our well-being. Why should we trust them so lightly?
It's not a blind trust. Who you're
Yeah.
trusting is the independent reviewers that review the
There
data
we
that you
go.
put forward.
Okay, but is this political or is this science?
Health is as much public health as it is individual health.
Okay, but
It's a little bit political. It's hard to like completely isolate yourself from politics, but it's really interesting because Donald Trump has, because I know for sure this guy's a Trump supporter. He was in the video with Sam Cedar. Donald Trump had a major role in the development of the COVID-19 vaccine, and it was possibly one of the biggest medical accomplishments, definitely from the 21st century. And he can't even properly take credit for it because how many of his supporters just vehemently hate him for it, hate the vaccine and uh all that sort of like COVID-19 like guidelines and all that stuff. Right? It's just I don't know.
But would you say guys like Dr. Peter McCullough or Dr. Rich, would you say that they are probably not good experts that we should adhere to?
So Peter McCullough, he's a cardiologist, but like he's been known to be extremely dishonest about COVID-19. I think he's like one of the people that like, talks about like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and a lot of like studies have been conducted that shown that these were not very effective treatments against COVID-19 years even after they were first uh introduced and people were talking about them. It's been shown that they just weren't nearly as effective as like some of the other treatments that came out, like the monoclonal antibodies, for example. But yeah, he talks about that. Rich, I don't know who he's talking about. I want to say he's talking about Dr. Rich McCormick, who is a U.S. congressman from Georgia, but he's also a physician as well. I think he's also talked about like kind of these like COVID-19 like misinformation type of stuff, but like I'm not confident. But there's a difference between people who conduct these studies, publish them, and then people who are essentially charlatans who misrepresent the data in order to present a narrative.
I don't know who those people are.
So they're very anti-vax, or they've provided solutions like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin,
There we go. Yeah.
and they've stated over 200 peer-reviewed studies from different types of trials showing the efficacy of those kind of medications that are alternatives to COVID or the vaccination. But what I'm kind of getting to is that we're supposed to trust this specific agenda. So Pfizer, WHO, which once again, if we look at the track record, they haven't had a great track record. So it sounds like
WHO definitely has some issues. I mean, there's their close ties with China. That's not even like that the biggest problem, but I know it is something like worth discussing. I think the issue with the WHO is that I believe they have like strong ties to like the food industry. Um, but they're still a very much needed organization because every single disease has the potential to affect every single human on Earth. So an issue in one country can become an issue in every single country. And that's what happened with COVID-19 that spread from China to the rest of the world. We want to have like some sort of platform, some sort of infrastructure for the scientists and governments of the world to discuss ways of combating these like epidemics or pandemics. With the withdrawal of the WHO, I'm just really concerned because now apparently the CDC cannot collaborate with the WHO anymore to publish papers. And if we can't collaborate with them, it's gonna have possible like negative effects for global health.
to me, it's more of a political thing instead of a science thing. When you guys say trust the science and trust the experts, you actually mean
That was a terrible phrase, and honestly, like, trust the method, trust what the data shows, trust the trends we see, trust the consensus, and like let's like have good faith discussions like the other guy.
this group of experts. Because whenever big experts like RFK, even if you want to say he's not a doctor, he's not licensed, but his friends, Peter McCullough, Dr. Rich, they are great experts. They've had some of the most reviewed studies in the medical field. I don't see why we have to deny their science and their expertise and go with this set of people.
The thing with like RFK Jr., it's not just like his lack of like medical or research credentials. RFK Jr. is extremely dishonest in representing studies. And when I was like first doing research, let me actually just like change my screen here. When I was first doing research and like looking into RFK Jr., I was actually surprised by just the amount of dishonesty from this man. I mean, people are gonna always have different opinions. People are always gonna dissent to like what is the consensus. That's fine. But RFK Jr. takes it a step further where he will go out of his way to represent papers that are supposed to support his position. He's been known to either lie about what a paper says. He's been known to cite papers that are completely contradicting of what he was trying to say. This was brought up many times during the Senate hearing with the example of whether or not black people should have a different vaccination. And he based it on this paper from a man named Poland, who's a researcher at the Mayo Clinic. And it was a study that measured antibodies as a response to a certain vaccine. I don't know if it was the HPV vaccine, but it was one of these vaccines. And it did show that among black people, there was a slightly higher amount of antibodies. But the author of the paper, Poland, had to go and make a statement clarifying how RFK Jr. was misrepresenting his manuscript in order to put some like weird race realist spin that like black people apparently like need a different vaccines or a different vaccine schedule because they have like a stronger immune response. The level of dishonesty displayed by like RFK Jr. is something that I couldn't have imagined. I mean, when I think of RFK Jr., it's like every single anti-science conspiracy trope ever. I mean, not only is he like against a vaccine mandate, he's also against vaccines. He's also an AIDS denialist. He also thinks that psychotic medication is the reason why we have mass school shootings. I think he believes that fluoride in the water is the reason why kids are being diagnosed with like gender dysphoria. And the list goes on and on. I mean, there's like seed oils, there's everything, and it gets worse and worse. And right now, we're having the cases with measles, and he just recently came out and said that like the measles vaccine is the MMR vaccine is the most effective treatment against measles. Weeks after he said that like vitamin A was just as good or a possible alternative to the MMR vaccine. There's no equivalency here. Like there's no equivalency between him and like let's say someone like I don't know. I'm kind of blanking out on like some people right now, but let's say like the CDC or the FDA or the German couple that like help create the mRNA vaccine in Germany. Uh, we're talking about like people who go, they do their honest work, they publish the data, and you have charlatans who completely misrepresent even the studies that are supposed to be on their side. It's just, it's despicable in my opinion. Yeah. See what else he has to say.
I think when you look at the grand scheme of things, you have to look at consensus. And when you look at consensus, not just the United States, you look at the WHO. This is a world organization. This is not a United States organization. In fact, we just pulled out of the WHO funding-wise. So this is the most unbiased you can get. Can you erase human bias from research? Absolutely not, because it's done by us, and humans are inherently biased. When you talk about Pfizer's past mistakes or whichever organization you want to choose from the pharma side of things, to be skeptical of them is so important. And the way that they've been lacking transparency for a long time, especially when it comes to pricing and the way that they've chosen their development of medications, I'm the first person to admit that that is valuable.
But there's also like the whole like pharmaceuticals role when it comes to like the fentanyl crisis. I mean, there's a lot wrong with like pharmaceutical companies. We should definitely be skeptical, but like I don't know why we have to go to the other extreme of just like completely disregard every single bit of data out there. All these like high quality manuscripts being published just because it doesn't like fit your narrative.
When we say Pfizer, where we say Purdue or one of these pharmaceuticals, there are people that are working there that are researchers that you're talking about. The shareholders, the people that are investing in those companies are a different set of people. So when we get data from Pfizer and it's brought to the advisory committee in the CDC or the FDA. These are independent bodies that are trying to verify through a peer review process if that is true. They're trying to do their best with the knowledge that we have. Will we have perfect answers? Will there be mess ups? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean you just throw everything out the way and say, hands up, we failed before, so we can't fail again.
I would agree that there's a difference between mistakes and deception. So deception is an intent. You're intending to have malice towards someone, right? You're intending to make more money by lying to the public. You're intending to make more money or more profit by not showing all the clinical studies that were conducted that show adverse reactions to the thing that you're putting forth. So that's where I would also make a delineation that there's mistakes, which we can all make, and I would also say science can make mistakes, but then there's this other section, which is an intention.
But can we point out, I mean, I would like to see if he can like, point out to an instance in which, let's say, Moderna or Pfizer were actively decepting public over the adverse side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, it would have been a lot. It's very hard to like hide this. I know with the internet, if you hear like, let's say, like, oh, you know, I know someone who had their like lymph nodes inflated because of a reaction to the vaccine. It's a lot easier to hear about these like sort of like adverse effects than in the past. For example, I remember hearing like I think a story where like I think some doctor somewhere like in Europe or something actually contracted COVID-19 from the COVID-19 vaccine, which is insane. but like that kind of like that's gonna have an effect in how like we perceive of like what's actually going on, because it's so much easier to hear about these extreme cases. So like you're like one case and you think like, oh, who knows how many there are, and then turns out like there's very little.
How do you judge intention?
That's the thing is with these kind of companies, we have to assume good
Ah,
intention.
that would have been interesting.
Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Mack.
Appreciate
it.
Appreciate it.
Hello? Pleasure?
Pleasure. So knowing that there are side effects that do come along with the
Yeah.
COVID vaccine, which is irrefutable, it's a risk management. And in
Yeah.
any circumstance, if there's a risk, there must be a choice at all times. Would you agree with that?
Well, there's always a choice.
Well, there wasn't a choice September 9th, 2021, when Biden instituted the OSHA mandate with all federal employees and every business over 100 employees. Would you agree with that?
I still think it was a choice.
So yeah, it was a choice. So I believe I would have to look this up, but I think with like the Biden mandate for federal employees, they either had to take the vaccine or they had to like take a COVID-19 test to prove that they didn't have COVID, that they had to have a negative result. Eventually, this mandate was rescinded like next year in 2023. I don't know if this was a court order or he just decided to rescind it. But there was a choice because either you get the vaccine or you don't get the vaccine, and then you can go to work as long as you have a negative COVID-19 result from a test, which I would say is pretty fair. And we have like really good tests that you could do at home with like the saliva. I'm sorry, with the nose swab, actually.
So when you say it wasn't a choice for all the service members that were part of the military that refused the vaccine, they were dishonorably discharged. Did they?
There's a lot of stuff, I mean, you have to do in the military that like essentially isn't a choice, that like most people like wouldn't do outside. I mean, what about like every other vaccine you have to take for like these jobs? I mean, you guys against the annual flu shot you have to take each year? Which, by the way, interesting fact, the annual flu shot is far less effective than the COVID-19 vaccine when it first rolled out for the alpha and beta strains. When the alpha and beta strains, vaccine came out, the mRNA vaccine, I believe it was between like 95 to like 96%, depending on whether you had the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine. Whereas the annual flu shot, it's typically between like 40 and 60%. It's still recommended to get the flu shot because you still want to, you know, protect yourself against flu. It could be really bad for some people, actually, though. And the reason it's not that effective is because the flu shot is actually essentially it's a cocktail for like different strains of the flu versus like the COVID-19. It's just like the one or two strains of like COVID-19 that's trying to protect you too. But like I want to know these people, like, would you guys be against the flu shot, the annual flu shot that's required for like most jobs, knowing it's not a very effective, it's not as effective as like let's say other vaccines for like protecting other diseases, and the risk is very little too.
They have a choice.
They had a choice.
They did.
And what was their choice?
I'm not saying whether or not this is a fair choice or if I support the choice, but it was a choice.
Okay.
Just like with children, in order to go to a public school where by choosing to not vaccinate your child, you're potentially putting other children at risk. You could choose not to put them in a public school and therefore not be mandated to get the vaccines.
Everyone has the ability to make a right choice for them and their family. And if you are able to fully understand with informed consent, there are many, many risk factors, especially knowing that there's no long-term studies, not one.
Sorry.
What?
Time's up.
No, we've had plenty of studies published like a couple years after. It showed that like the later boosters weren't as effective in protecting against COVID. But then COVID-19 became more contagious, but then it wasn't as deadly or it wasn't as severe as like the first two strains for alpha and beta. And then the vaccines against those were, even years now, very effective against those first two strains. I don't know what these people.
Thank you. My next.
All right. I guess that's it for today. I'll try to put more videos out. I've been really busy lately. Of a lot of these things. I have a couple of scripted videos in the works that I look forward to. And I also want to do more of these science videos because I really like science and I really like talking about it. So yeah. And until then, stay classy.